I do apologize, everybody. I've just started recording. I'm sorry, Cyrus.
No, it's all right. So mine looks like the political climate of America and how socialism is perceived over there. Because obviously it's very negatively viewed. Even any mention of it within lawmaking or politics as a whole is instantly shut down. So I want to see how it's got to that point, why it's got to that point, and what are some of the root causes of it. I'm nominating Harry then, I guess, Harry Newman.
My topic is roughly around the area of psychology and just looking at how events can affect people and how certain extreme situations can also have an effect on human psychology. To be fair, that is quite simply it is just sort of the psychological effects in extreme situations is how I like to word it. Paige, you can go next.
Hi, I'm Paige. My EPQ is about the online safety bill, which obviously isn't directly related to your case, but I'm wanting to study law at university, so I'm more here on a personal interest basis.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'll nominate Tiller.
Paige, could you just help Jason? What sort of law do you want to study? Criminal, corporate?
I haven't necessarily decided yet, but I think the most interesting for me would be the criminal or commercial.
Thank you, Paige. Sorry.
Thank you.
My EPQ is on kind of feminism like the way feminism has helped to adapt the law over like the last century. Because again, my topic isn't necessarily related, but I am quite interested in what you've got to talk about, which is why I'm here. But I want to go into law at uni, which is what I'm applied for, and hopefully into commercial law. But again, it will just be what I feel like will end up being my strong point. Anyway, I'll pass to Elle.
Thanks.
My EPQ is on like extremism and how it affects like global understanding. But I'm studying criminology at A level, so that's kind of why I've joined, because I'm like interested to see what you have to say and everything. That's kind of about it.
So Eleanor, when you say extremism, can you help me get a little specific what you mean by that?
So it's like terrorist groups and how so I'm basically focusing it on ISIS and how they've changed like Muslims' views to be their own, and how they're an extremist group, and then how everyone in the world like now expects people from like Islam to be a terrorist kind of thing.
Sure. The overgeneralization of an entire group of people. Sure. Thank you for that. So Marcus, before I spend a little time talking about me, how much do they know going in? Because I'd hate to be redundant.
You would never be redundant, Jason, but I've only given them the very brief outline, and saying that when you were much younger, not that you were terribly old now, of course, that you took a path which wasn't a terribly helpful one for your future development, and now you're on a completely different path and have created a completely different name for yourself. And that's more or less it.
Okay. So thank you for that. I'll start by saying that, I was actually raised as an only child from a moderate level of privilege. And as a result of me developing a very negative perspective of what it meant to be a man and a belief system that accompanied, by the time I was 20 years old, I took part in a series of crimes, the last of which resulted in a man losing his life. And as a result of that, I received a sentence of 26 years to life in prison at 20 years old for my first offense. I'm currently working in the reentry space, helping to address some of the punishment based perspectives that accompany not only incarceration, but also reentry services when people get out. So I'm sure we'll have time to get into that more about my actual role and the work that I'm doing there. But with 5 minutes, I don't know how deeply I should go before we should take a pause and just have some questions that you might have in regards to maybe the circumstances that led up to my incarceration or what my experience was like inside. But maybe we should take a pause and just see if there's any opening questions in regards to those details I shared. No curiosity about what prison's like? Is it really like the movies?
I've got a feeling, Jason, that you have stunned people.
Yeah.
I think it's...
No, I did want to ask that, but I didn't know if it was a bit offensive to be like, oh, is it like what they show you on TV and stuff like that?
No, I'm an open book. So I'll go into a little bit of like my earliest experiences. So I'm Black, I'm half Black and half Italian. And in California, the prison system is sharply divided by race. There's a lot of race-based, gang-based antisocial politics. My co-defendant, who's also my best friend, is white. And when we first were arrested for our crime, we came face to face with the reality of this antisocial culture, which is interesting because I think it was Harry, who's talking about the psychology of how events affect people in extreme situations. I can give you a short story. So I've known my co-defendant and best friend since I was 15 years old. We went to high school together. For a period of time, he lived under the same roof as me. And when we went to prison, this antisocial culture had a profound impact on our relationship. The first time that we went on a visit, my parents were coming to visit me, and his girlfriend, his then girlfriend, now his wife, was coming to visit him. Now, I actually introduced the two. And it seems very natural that when you see someone, you give them a hug. How are you doing, right? So I gave her a hug. Her name was Kelly. And then Ted came out and he had a visit and everything went relatively normal. By the time he left the visit and got back to his cell, his cellmate told him, who was also white because whites house with whites, what's going on? It's all over the yard right now that your girl was out there. The slang term was busting slobs, which means like hugging up and kissing on a Black dude, but he didn't say Black dude, he said the other word, right? And so that was like the first real like shot in the face of an extreme situation and how it impacted Ted and me psychologically. So to unpack that, for the first 7 years of our incarceration, we were at the same facility, a maximum security prison, because of the nature of our crime. And because the atmosphere was so saturated with hatred based on race, the amount of time that we spent talking to each other did not exceed the 13 minutes we've been on this call. Because the consequences for him could have likely been death. And for me, possibly the same. The politics, the negative politics and antisocial politics for the whites and the Blacks and Hispanics in prison are very real, especially at maximum security institutions. So that element, Tilly, is kind of like the movies, like that exists in California state prisons. There's a heavily saturated atmosphere of hatred, anxiety, and territorialism based on the color of your skin and the gang that you're a part of. But that's not the whole story. That's not the whole story, thankfully. And I can share with you that the last 10 years of my incarceration and my relationship with Ted were drastically different. So in California, when you demonstrate that you're following the rules, you're behaving, you're doing what you need to do, the point system drops down, and then you actually are transferred to an institution that has a lower level of security. And with a lower level of security, you're typically surrounded by people who are on the right track in their rehabilitation, in their personal transformation, and are approaching an opportunity for freedom. So there's more flexibility and latitude. So in 2010, I had transferred to an institution in Central California. And as Providence would have it, Ted was transferred there as well about a year later. He had made a huge transformation in his life. I had already begun my journey. One of the things I realized when I was arrested, as the police officers put me in the squad car in front of my parents' home, and I saw my father crying for the first time in my life, that my choices weren't just about me. So one of the things I resolved to do early on was to begin pursuing my education inside, which they supported me with through correspondence courses, because I didn't want to continue revisiting that pain on my family. Ted, by 2008, made a similar decision for himself, and he actually founded the organization that I now work for. It's a nonprofit called the Crop Organization. And initially, he founded it as a mechanism or a means to kind of bridge the divide between the races in prison. Because one thing he understood was that it was really hard to hate someone, regardless of the color of their skin, if you played sports with them or if you played music with them. So Crop was founded as a mechanism to introduce sports equipment and music equipment and to bring people together and kind of break up that negative perspective that existed so often in prison. By 2010, when we reconnected, however, there was a new vision. We came up with an idea to certify alcohol and other drug counselors among the population who was incarcerated. And because we were at a lower level where there was not such dire consequences for interacting with someone of a different race, we were able to build a team that was incredibly diverse: Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, people who were committed to doing something positive for themselves, something positive for the community inside and beyond. And as a result of that work, over the course of 3 years, we successfully helped to certify 33 life-term individuals as alcohol and other drug counselors. And of those 33 people who all were sentenced to life at one point in time, there's 29 who have since paroled, come into the community, been granted parole, and none of them have recidivated. So along with that, over the course of the 10 years, Ted and I, with our team, helped to establish a personal leadership training where we served a little over 1,000 incarcerated individuals in small groups, seminars, entrepreneurialism, how to be a leader of your own life, owning the responsibility for the results that are created from the choices we make. We've delivered seminars in prison to college students, community college students, a little over 300 college students, deans, professors. And then in 2017, Ted had a thunderstruck, an amazing idea. We were actually in a book reading club with a local private school. And the private school was bringing in their students to read literature with us, and they were sharing a story about a prisoner of war camp where this was during the Korean conflict. The book is called The Bridge Over the Miracle Kwai. And in the story, it was sharing how the culture inside of this prisoner of war camp was very similar to most prisons, like a scarcity mindset, if you will, where people are looking out for themselves, not worried about anybody else. I got to take care of me. But there was a small group of individuals who made a different decision. They chose to look out for each other, and they paired up in a buddy system where they had the philosophy of leaving no man behind. And one person gave so much of himself to the person that he was looking out for that in the process, he actually died. And when he gave his ultimate sacrifice to his brother, it had a fundamental impact on the entire culture of the prison itself, and everyone began looking out for each other. So when Ted heard this story, he leaned over to me. We were actually the steering committee of an inmate leisure time activity group. It's like a small group where inmates can invite people in for different types of self-help rehabilitation like activities. He said, we need to do that, Jay. We need to establish a scholarship where the guys inside of prison are raising money to support a young man who doesn't have the financial capability to attend this amazing private school. And between 2017 and 2020, we raised a little over $32,000 to support a young man in attending this private school. Now, $32,000 might not sound like a whole lot of money, but considering that it was raised among a population that made on average 8 cents an hour, I think that's indicative of the amount of work and sacrifice that people made to help a young person have a bright future. So there's just a little bit more context. I went kind of long there, Tilly, but it's, prison isn't always the most negative perspective that is shown typically through media. There are human beings behind walls. And one of the great things about being a human being is we have the choice to choose who we want to be and to transform our lives at any given moment. And there's a lot of that in prison as well. People who are actively working to improve themselves, to prepare themselves to re-enter the community and be of service and add value. Any other questions?
Yeah, I actually had a question. In the original maximum security prison, you said that there was very tense race relations in there. Would you say that it's likely that people could see this and sort of rebel against it, or is it more likely that people just succumb to it and develop that mindset themselves?
So that's a great question, Cyrus. Just to give you a little bit of context, when I was incarcerated in 1999, there was a cultural zeitgeist, if you will, that had a perspective that this was actually words from the governor of California at the time. If someone goes to prison with a life sentence, the only way they'll ever come home is in a pine box. That was a public statement that he made, basically saying that if you were sentenced to life in prison, you're going to die there. If you couple that like administrative perspective, which was adopted by the state, like lifers got nothing coming, they're going to die in prison, with a complete lack of programming. So this is, like I said, when I was first incarcerated, there was no programs. There was no real rehabilitative work that was offered. There was just a 6x9 and a yard with concrete and steel tables. It is a incredibly tempting invitation to give yourself over to despair. What's also true, I want to say this though, about my experience of the human spirit, is that people have an opportunity to learn lessons at rock bottom that they would never discover at the mountaintop. So while it's true that the vast majority of people going into an atmosphere like that often succumb to the negativity, because they just want to stay alive. That's the experience. You go to prison, you're celled up with somebody and they school you down. This is how it is in here. You're white, you mess with the whites. If you see a riot jump off between the whites and the blacks, you better go. Otherwise, when it's over, we're going to come get you, right? You don't eat with blacks. You don't smoke a cigarette after a black. All of these rules are, you're, as they call it, you're laced in how it is. And the experience for someone coming in is this is what I have to do to survive. That being said, it's also true that there's opportunities for you to create something new for yourself, which I did. I mean, I was indoctrinated into that culture as well. And I chose, thankfully, with the support of my parents, to pursue my education. So while most people were on the yard, politicking, doing whatever they may be doing, I was oftentimes either in school or in my cell with a book and a pen, right? So, and some coursework. So the question is, and this is a central part of the personal leadership training that we provided to people for so many years, is that we have the agency, the freedom to determine how we're going to relate to any situation, right? There's a great book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I absolutely suggest it for a read. It's a short book, but it's about a doctor, a psychologist, who was went through the experience of the Holocaust. And one of the things he said, it's an extremely profound book, but one of the things he said is one of the last human freedoms that we have is the freedom to choose our attitude about any situation. So I hope that kind of answers your question. The short answer is that most people feel like they have to survive, and they kind of give themselves over to it. But it's not always true, right? And there are a healthy amount of people who say, I want to do something different with my time and something productive with it.
Jason, can I just ask, you said, so when you were in the maximum security prison, and you said you're in your cell and you had the yard, were there no opportunities for education or other programs then? It was only when you got into that second institution that you're able to do that.
So it was a combination of the maximum security institution and the political climate at the time. So when I first was incarcerated in 1999, there was no grants for college education. The only education that they had available was compulsory for people who did not have a high school diploma or GED equivalent. So if you came into prison, they had a testing system, and if you scored below a certain number, and you didn't have a high school diploma on record, then you were forced to go to learn, second grade English or third grade math and get your GED. Outside of that, there was no programs when I first was incarcerated. As the years have progressed, however, there has been new legislation and policy that is incentivizing positive programming, and with that comes funding for, at this time, people can go and earn their associate's degree, their 2-year degree, college degree. And there's other opportunities for programming, but there's usually a shortage on the higher levels, the more maximum security, because people there typically haven't quite figured it out yet and are still a little bit of the knuckleheads. Yeah.
And you mentioned the word despair. It was easy to give yourself over to despair. Presumably, in an institution like that, in a situation like that, mental health problems must be absolutely incredible. Just explain to us some of the difficulties, the mental health issues that you saw or that people faced, please.
Sure. So I think it's a big question, because when you're inside, it's almost like we used to kind of, me and my friends would kind of like make light of it. But there's a status inside of prison. It's called triple CMS. Please don't ask me to remember what the acronym is, but basically it's for people who take psych meds to help with psychological dysfunction. And it was kind of like a running thing to just, it's impossible not to notice. They have what is called med call throughout the day at different times, and the line of individuals who are taking medication for depression, anxiety, trouble sleeping. It's incredible, and it's really sad. And just on a personal level, I can say this: the year before I was paroled, before the governor of California ordered my immediate release from prison. And when I say the year before, I mean the entire year. The entire year, there was an active war between two rival gangs that lived on the same yard as me. So, and just thinking about it right now, I get a little tense thinking about it. Like there were 4 different times that I was on the yard when they happened. These huge melees between a couple hundred people, and there was another 5 times where I witnessed it from my window in my cell, which is adjacent to the yard. And the level of violence between these people who really wanted to see each other dead was really astounding. And on many levels, I haven't unpacked like the trauma of that type of those type of activities. I think at my best, I do what I can to temper the negative with the positive that we also produced in our groups and in our work. Like we produce a lot of positive in people's lives, and I do my best to remain focused on that. But there is, you know, mental stress as well.
Jason,
Sorry, go on.
sorry,
Go on,
Jason,
Mark.
just for those of us who have no idea, two questions. First of all, when did you get released?
Oh, okay. It was March 27th of 2020. That's when the governor ordered both mine and Ted's immediate release from prison as a result of the work that we had been doing together for
So 18 months ago.
Mhm.
Wow. And for those of us who have no idea what a United States maximum security prison is like, I mean, I'm guessing guns and stuff,
Yes.
and I'm guessing guards are a bit maybe not as friendly as one might have hoped, or maybe I'm wrong.
You're accurate. It's an accurate assessment. So, you know, in light of, I think, way to kind of unpack like the way that people are perceived and how they justify it is, you know, it's tied into the United States perspective of prison itself and the purpose for it. So there's another great book. It's by a woman by the name of Michelle Alexander, and it's called The New Jim Crow. And what she does is she really articulates the perpetuation of slavery in this country as it is extended through incarceration, mass incarceration. I mean, the numbers are what they are. The vast majority of people who are incarcerated in the United States are Black and brown. And the perspective of those who are incarcerated and the reason why they're incarcerated is because they need to be punished. It's actually codified in the California Penal Code 666 times. However strange that number may be, that the purpose of prison is to punish. Is to punish. The purpose of prison is not to rehabilitate, to reintegrate, to restore, it's to punish. And when you look at the amount of time that they sentence people to, you know, here in the States, we have what's called LWOP, which is life without the possibility of parole. We still kill people. There's still a death penalty. And if you strike out in California, so strike out means that you've committed 3 felonies, not necessarily violent felonies. It could be something, there were people still in prison to this day who were struck out for having a bag with residue of a narcotic and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
Because they'd had 3 felonies against them. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
So instead of sending them to a substance abuse treatment, you know, there's people who struggle with substance abuse, right? Because of the California 3 strikes law, they were sent to prison for 25 years to life at a minimum.
And that's still in operation now, is it? The 3 strikes law?
Strikes law is still in effect. There have been recent legislative amendments. So now, today, the only way someone can be struck out on their 3rd strike is if it's a violent felony today. It wasn't always that way. But now when you talk about things like a violent felony, there's nuances. So for instance, if a robbery is a violent felony, right? An ex-felon in possession of a firearm could be argued as a violent felony. So there's nuances, but yes, there have been some changes, and you know, it's a never-ending fight to get some of these laws and sentencing structures figured out in a more equitable and humane way.
I'm sorry to keep asking. I've got a question here from one of our other students who sadly gives her apology she couldn't make it. And I was thinking about the comment that the governor, the Californian governor, said about, you know, if you're going for 25 years, you're not, you know, you're only coming out in a box. She basically said, have you found the American judicial system to be fair? And I wondered whether the same, you've talked about the real race differences within prison. What about, in terms of the sort of judicial system? Do you feel that there is there parity? Is there equality or not? Is there discrimination?
Absolutely not. Just looking at, I can give you a very simple example, the distinction between the sentencing laws for crack cocaine and powder cocaine. So back in the 80s, you may or may not know, in some of the urban areas, there was what was called a crack epidemic, crack cocaine. So when you go into Black communities, Hispanic communities, the predominant drug was crack cocaine. There's the situation, right? So when you go into areas where there's not very many opportunities for education or employment, and there's a culture of criminality, there's this temptation to sell drugs. And crack cocaine was a much cheaper version, easy to make, and helped, in their minds, people who were in that life to earn money, right? But the sentencing laws, so crack cocaine is just a rock form of the powder substance. The crack cocaine carried, I think it was 3 to 4 times longer sentence than powder cocaine, which is typically used by Caucasians or white people in America, right? So if that's the most simple and obvious, why is it's the same drug in 2 different forms, but over here where predominantly Black and brown people are using it, you're sentencing them 4 times longer.
Okay.
Jason, so we over in the UK, we get fascinated by the whole Epstein and Ghislaine saga unfolding as it drags in other people, such as Prince Andrew and such as the chief exec of Barclays, who had to resign because he was found with 1,200 emails backwards and forwards between him and Epstein, and the circle seems to be growing and growing and growing. One of the things which seems to be coming out is the richer you are, the lower the sentence. The poorer you are, or the more disadvantaged you are, the longer you're going to be incarcerated. Does that ring true?
I believe so. I think, ideally, the scales of justice, Lady Liberty, if she's blindfolded, right, and it would be equitable. But when the rubber meets the road, if you have a bunch of money and you can pay for the level of service from an attorney who has the right connections, you're gonna get a favor. It's really that simple. So it's an unfortunate reality for the vast majority of Black and brown people in the United States who don't have any money. We're struggling just to put food on the table. When they make poor choices, they really don't have that fair chance.
Wow. So let's move and see how you might be able to help some of our students in some of the subjects which they are progressing with, and see what light you can cast to help them.
Before we do, if I ask one more question.
Iris, of course.
I was just wondering about how you think it would be best to approach the problems with it, because obviously the US system is awful and unfair. 25% of its population, or 25% of the prison population is in America alone, with one of the highest reoffence rates. Do you think it'd be better to just completely scrub the system and start anew, start fresh, start with looks of somewhere else, like for example Sweden with a 16% reoffence rate and one of the lowest incarcerations? I'm curious as how you think it should be approached and helped.
That's a great question. As promising as it might seem to just completely, as you said, scrub the whole system and start over, I don't know how feasible that would be, which is why I do the work I do. And the work I do is to create conversations, to lead a movement of redefining the purpose of prison, redefining the purpose of reentry services, Because I mean, the truth of the matter is that every year the United States pays, in regards to all the criminal justice system, $3 trillion a year, 3 trillion with a T. That's a lot of money. They pay in California $160,000 a year to keep one person in a 6x9. One person. So, I mean, a fraction of that, a third of that, invested in their rehabilitation would save taxpayers so much money. But it really starts with having a conversation about, like, so we know the facts, like the purpose of prison has been to punish, and this has been the result. Like you said, we lead the world. 25% is right here in the United States of America. It's burdening our taxpayers. It's hurting our kids because money's being siphoned away from education, right, to pay for prisons and incarceration. So how can we do it better? And that's when you have the conversation about how they're doing it in Sweden or Germany or the UK, right? Where they're really investing in people's rehabilitation, creating opportunities for people to step into, to re-engage the community in responsible ways, equipping them to add value to the workforce, right? Isn't that a better use of funds than putting them in a 6x9 and just really giving them space to become better criminals, quote unquote criminals, right? Because when you treat someone like an animal, it would be pretty ridiculous to expect them to behave in any other way.
Cyrus, what's the offending rate for the UK?
I'm not sure, but it's not I know the tops are like sort of Sweden, I think Iceland, Greenland are all quite good. Norway as well, sort of top tiers of wealth in Europe. I'm not sure about us. I think it's about 40%-ish off the top of my head.
Bit higher, 70% reoffend within the first 3 years of leaving incarceration.
Yeah.
Really?
And we have 90% of the money is spent on incarceration, 10% on rehabilitation.
Well, you're doing better than us there. Ours is 2.5% for rehabilitation.
You're joking.
Well, that's because you're trying to punish. So yeah. So look, I'll just put up the list. Just this is what our students are all sort of studying or looking at very broadly here. But as you can see, we all have a very wide interest in what's going on in the US, in particular your story, Jason, the amazing turnaround. I mean, I suppose one of the things which will be obvious, or which might be the students might be thinking, is how I can completely change the life I'm leading now. You know, they might not be in a bad life situation, but they might all have, you know, it'd be nice to live in the Cayman Islands, or nice to be a chiropractor or whatever. I mean, how on earth did you actually make such an enormous change from being incarcerated, exiting in a pine box for murder, into being a major force in the United States criminal justice system and a campaigner for all that is good? I mean, how on earth did you do that? Because if you can do that, and presumably anybody here might decide, hell, I want to be a doctor in San Salvador if they wanted to.
Right. So the answer, Marcus, to that is really not very complicated, because it wasn't me so much as it was an appreciation for the people who love me. So I shared a little bit about the story of my father and my incarceration. I didn't talk about my mom. My mom is still living, and you know, for those first 7 years that I was at that maximum security institution, which was about a 2-hour drive for her, she made that drive to visit me every single weekend for 7 years straight, constantly letting me know that I was loved, that there was hope, and that I had something to fight for. So that was an invaluable piece of my decision to make the most of it. Coupled with that, my dad, he died in 2002. But before he died, we were on a visit. It was just he and I. And, you know, he was already 65 at the time. And, you know, I was 2 years into a 26 to life sentence. And he was doing his best to kind of like encourage me. He was telling me, he's like, you know, I'm going to stick around till you get out, son, and we're going to open a small business together. And I told him, I said, Dad, but I still have 24 years. And he looked at me just so seriously and he said, son, I don't care if it's 24 years, 24 months, 24 days. All that you really have is this moment. And you've got to make the most of every moment that you have. And I took that with me. And that's really when I began my educational journey. When he passed away, I put my nose down with my mom's support and began taking classes. And over the course of the next 17 years, I earned my bachelor's degree and 2 master's degrees, state certification as an alcohol and other drug counselor, and made the most of every moment. Some moments were finer than others. But then in 2010, when I reconnected with Ted and began building a community of people who were committed to doing something more with their lives, something more with their time, not only for themselves, but for others, then that's when it really came full circle for me. And I understood clearly the old African proverb of, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with others. If you want to go far, go with others.
How difficult was it to get other people on board then with your rehabilitation program? You know, this idea that you got for people to help each other. How difficult was that to influence people and to get them on board? That must have been incredibly hard, I thought.
So, well, it actually, so I have a fundamental philosophy that if you want to see what someone is up to, just look at the results that they're producing. And the reality is that by 2010, there was a shift in some of the political climate and the rhetoric about prison. At the time, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor, and he understood that the prison industrial complex was not sustainable. It was costing taxpayers too much money. So even though he was conservative in his political views, begrudgingly, probably he said, we need to start opening these doors a little bit and letting people out. So that was the first glimmer of hope for people with life sentences, that freedom could be attained through the board. And at that point in time, you saw a lot of people, specifically people with life terms, beginning to involve themselves in rehabilitative programming. So it wasn't hard when Ted and I came up with the idea to begin this alcohol and other drug certification program. We looked out to see who's doing good work and who was serious about, not just getting out of prison, but transforming their lives and doing something good. And we culled those people and brought them in on the team. And over the years, the team grew, because as we continued to do the work and produce good, not only in the community inside, but outside, people wanted to be a part of it, to the point of us actually establishing that scholarship. We almost had, I think it was close to 70% of the population of over 1,500 people who participated in that scholarship at some point in time, because they wanted to be a part of something good.
Fantastic. Right, come on, you guys, you need to ask questions because you've only got 15 minutes left. So,
Dave, it's okay. Stop being a teacher. You've been asking all the questions.
I know. I've got to shut up. Sorry. Fascinating. Sorry.
I have a question. When you were in the maximum security prison, was there like a constant fear of like feeling unsafe? But I'll extend the question obviously afterwards. But
Tilly, can you put your camera on, or has it gone?
It's because when I plug my laptop in, the camera breaks.
Oh, okay.
So I can't do anything about it. I'm really sorry.
All right.
You need to put 50p in the meter, Tilly. Turn your lights on.
I don't know what's wrong with it.
So to answer your question, Tilly, I hate to expound on the gory details, but I will to answer your question. So my second day, like out of the reception center and in a cell. I'm coming out of reception. I'm 20 years old, and they're like, okay, you're going to B yard, which is a level 4, 270 design, which means, you know, there's towers with guns, razor wire, mini rifles. The guards are equipped with spray, pepper spray, OC pepper spray, and they have a button and a baton, a steel baton, right? And I'm in the cell on the second day, and I'm in there with a guy who I don't even know, and I hear scuffling next door. And I'm like, what's going on? What, they fighting over there? And what was happening was a man was being raped by a cellie. That was my second day. Now, in all fairness, that was the only time that I'd heard of like people being sexually assaulted in prison, but that was the closest proximity I ever had to it on my second day. At the end of my first week, we were walking to the chow hall. So you leave your building and you walk through a sally port to around a track to go to a mess hall or chow hall. And as I'm walking through the chow hall, one individual, two white men, one individual came up behind the other and stabbed him several times and then proceeded out the door like nothing happened. Now, the number of stabbings that I've seen in 20 years is a lot. I've seen a lot of those. Now, I want to, temper that with the reality that most time, when I say most, I'm going to say 80% of time in prison is monotonous. It's the same thing every day. You hear a series of bells indicating that doors are going to open to go to eat, bells to lock up, bells for work and school release, bells for yard recall, bells for lockup, bells for evening program, bells for final lockup. That's your day, every day. And 80% of the time, it's uneventful. The other 20% of the time, you do have those incidents. Like I said, my last year of incarceration was extremely violent time. Probably it was the most violent time I've experienced in my entire incarceration. That said, as far as like me feeling personally like I was in danger a lot, one of the earliest lessons I learned inside, because I was a non-affiliate, which means I wasn't a part of a street gang. So I'm going into prison as a young Black man who doesn't have any backup. Like I had no backup. Like wasn't from a certain gang where I had homies who had my back. I was told, however, by an older individual who had a sentence of LWOP, like he was never getting out of prison. He said, look, Jay, he said, you're a good young man. You're doing your best to do the right thing in here. And remember this, it doesn't matter where you're from. It matters how you come. Because in prison, the only currency you have is your conduct. Your conduct is your currency. There's no paper money or anything like that. Like the only thing that people have is how they carry themselves. So I was very intentional about carrying myself in a respectful, friendly way, because it was a natural expression of who I am, and it served me. So I didn't walk around with fear, to answer your question, Tilly, except for those off chances that there was a riot kicking off. Those are pretty anxious moments. But otherwise, the answer is
I've got a question. So I was just wondering, obviously, with a lot of violence and stuff and unfairness in the system, how often did you feel that you could give in to that despair? Like, how did you stay motivated to stick on a path of like development?
Okay, great question. So again, it comes down to me for the people who loved me, both outside of prison and in. For the first 10 years, largely my mom, you know, outside of her visits, letters from other family members who continue to believe in me and want the best for me, and just like this understanding that I had when I first committed the crime, like what you do impacts the people you love, period. Right. And then the subsequent 10 years outside of my network of friends and colleagues that I was doing work with in there who supported each other, like emotionally, you know, in our thinking, getting clear on what we wanted for our future and what it was going to take to create that future. I also met my wife in 2011, who was just has been a phenomenal resource for me in staying clear. I didn't even share this. We've only got 8 minutes, but I'm actually a dad. I have 2 boys under 3 years old. And just, you know, constantly thinking about the future and what I want with not only for myself, but for the people I love and with the people I love, helped me to avoid that despair and give myself over to that negativity.
Jason, just as on the side for Paige, did you have access to internet? Was that freely available in prison?
No, I'm sorry, not to make light, but there's no technology in prison. There's the only thing you have in regards to technology is a 13-inch television that you must purchase, your family must purchase, and you can, you know, stick it on a box in your cell, and you can plug into the cable network for the institution, which depending on the institution, you usually get like maybe 10 channels that are, you know, cable networks, and then 5 channels that are provided by the institution, like instruction manuals for the institution. But no, there's no cell phones. If there are cell phones, they're there illegally, which that happens too. Like staff will smuggle in cell phones and charge the incarcerated population, like have your people send me $1,000 for a $50 phone type thing. That does happen, but it's against the rules. No phones, no tablets. The only computers are like 1998 Windows that are in computer labs in education. No internet. It's all intranet. So.
I have another question. That's all right. Obviously, when you're in prison, you've got as you said, you've got a scheduled day, you've got bells for everything. So obviously, you would have felt happy when you found out you were getting out. But was it scary, the fact that obviously you've adapted to be there, and then you've got to adapt to be back into the real world, which will have changed a lot over the period of time you were inside. So, how was it scary? Was it hard?
It was. So that, I mean, that's. The answer to that question is longer than we have, but I'm gonna give it a go here. So in the States, if you have a life sentence, right, especially a life sentence for a crime of my nature, you go in front of what is called the parole board. Now, the parole board process is usually anywhere between 6 and 9 months, because you have a psych review, you have to have your parole plans ready, you have the actual parole hearing, and then the governor has his opportunity to review and possibly take your date. So like I said, it's between 6 and 9 months, the whole process of parole. I had put in a bid, myself and Ted had put in bids for a commutation, a gubernatorial or the governor's commutation, which is like a reduction of sentence. And every commutation that the governor had given to lifers prior to us reflected exactly what I shared with you. Like, you'll go to board in the next couple months, and you'll probably be home in like 6 to 9 months. So I'll never forget it. On March 27th, I was on the yard, the large yard, and I was sitting with a few friends, and we were talking about, parole preparedness. And there were two figures coming out of the building in suits. And I looked over to my friend. I said, "Who is that? You got two suits coming on the yard." And they're like, "Oh, it's the warden. It's the warden." And one of my friends from the housing unit I lived in comes running across the yard. Jay, they're looking for you." So I gather myself and I begin walking over. And in my mind, I'm thinking, it's the warden who's looking for me. It's not bad news, right? If it's bad news or something is going wrong, they'll probably send a counselor or a CO, or they'll just page me. They have a PA system that they can just page you off the yard. But for the warden to come in the yard, it's got to be good news. And so I was already thinking like, well, maybe I got the commutation, but I'm anticipating that it's the regular commutation where it's 6 to 9 months, and maybe I'll be home by the end of 2020. And he says to me, he says, "Well, Mr. Bryant," he says, "well, I've been told by the governor of California to let you know that he's ordered your immediate release from prison." And no one had ever heard of that before. So I got weak in the knees, and he shook my hand. You never see a warden shake an incarcerated person's hand, but he shook my hand, and everybody was like, "What the heck just happened?" So I went back to my friends, and I was like just in shock. Immediate release. I didn't even know what that meant. I was literally home 6 days later. I came home on April 2nd. Called my wife, and it was just this is a powerful moment. The first thing she said when I told her on the phone was, "You're going to be home to see your son born." Because I had missed my first son being born. He was born on January 11th of 2019, but my second son was born on August 22nd of 2020. And that was the first thing that came to her. As she's crying, she's like, "You're gonna be home to see your son born." So that was powerful. And it was scary. It was very scary, to answer your question, Tilly. Like, I've been gone for 20 years. And when I went in, I was a 20-year-old kid who didn't know his butt from his elbow. And didn't have any responsibility, really. Like I said, I was an only child. I was, largely privileged. But I was going to be coming out of prison at 41, a husband, a father of 2 babies, and a director. I'm a director of programs for the organization I work for. So it was scary. But again, back to the people that I love and who love me, just an incredible level of support from my wife. She did everything she could to make sure that it was a soft landing for me. COVID was an unexpected, a blessing for me in some ways, because since the world was forced to slow down, and is still slowed down, it gave me an opportunity to catch up, technologically, at the very least.
Wow, Jason, thank you. Thank you. I think you've left everybody trying to process all of that. In the last minute which we have, are there any burning questions which students wish to ask, which you can answer in a minute? Cyrus? Harry? Elle? Paige? Tilly?
Are you going to write a book?
So in a minute, I actually did write a book.
Oh yeah.
I wrote a book while I was in prison during my last 4 months of incarceration. And the reason why I was prompted to write it, it wasn't very noble. It was because I found out that we were going to have another child and I was still in prison. And I said, I can't just be here not contributing to my family. So I need to write this story and hopefully get it published and be able to contribute in some way. So the book is currently with an agent right now. We're working on getting it published. And it's called Finding Light in the Cave. So Finding Light in the Cave.
It's a great title.
Thanks. So if it ever makes it to publication, I'll be sure to forward it to Marcus and you all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good luck with that one. That'd be brilliant. Thank you so much,
Jason. It has been fantastically good of you to spare this hour of your valuable time.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Thank you all for having me.
I'm afraid we've held you up. You're a minute late for your next meeting.
Okay, I'll make it work.
But I'm sure you can talk your way out of it.
I think so.
So Jason, thank you. Thank you.
Best of luck to everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, Jason. Thank you.